Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om Parameshwara. Om Parameshwara. Om. Okay. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karava Vahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. I'll turn this volume up a little bit. Good. Very good. Nice to see you all, and welcome. Welcome also to our online students. Cold in here? Is the heat turned on? It feels quite cold. But maybe the heat needs to be turned on about 45 minutes before class. It's quite cold in here. Okay. Pardon me? No, I'm okay, thank you. Very good. So we continue. First of all, happy Deepavali to all of you and your families. I hope you had a very nice celebration last week. We continue our study of the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. We'll begin with some recitation, beginning with verse 8. As always, please glance at the meaning and then recite after me. Also, note the meaning of these first two verses. That's going to be the introductory topic for our class today. Naiva kinchit karomiti, naiva kinchit karomiti, yukto manyeta tattvavita, yukto manyeta tattvavita, pashyan shrinvan sprishan jigran, pashyan shrinvan sprishan jigran, ashnan gachan swapan shwasan, ashnan gachan swapan shwasan, pralapan visrajan grinhan, pralapan visrajan grinhan, unmishan nimishan api, unnisham nimishan api, indriyanindriyarteshu, indriyanindriyarteshu, vartantahiti dharayan, vartantahiti dharayan, brahman yadhaya karmani, brahman dhaya karmani, sangam tyaktva karoti yaha, sangam tyaktva karoti yaha, lipyate nasapapena, lipyate nasapapena, padmapatramivambhasa, padmapatramivambhasa. Kayena manasa buddhya, kayena manasa buddhya, kevalarindriyarapi, kevalarindriyarapi, yoginah karma kurvanti, yoginah karma kurvanti, sangam tyaktvatma shuddhaye, sangam tyaktvatma shuddhaye, excuse me, yukta karma palam tyaktva, yukta karma palam tyaktva, Tva Shantimapnoti Naishtikim Shantimapnoti Naishtikim Ayukta Kamakarena Ayukta Kamakarena Phale Sakto Nibadhyate Phale Sakto Nibadhyate Sarva Karmani Manasa Sarva Karmani Manasa Sanyasyaste Sukhe Sukham Vashi Sanyasya Kamvashi Navadvare Pure Dehi Navadvare Pure Dehi Naiva Kurvanna Karayan Naiva Kurvanna Karayan. Good. We will come to these verses shortly. We'll pick up the thread where we left off on verse 10. And as I said, the current topic, Naiva kinchit karomi iti, I don't do anything at all. So here we're talking about one of the 5 kinds of sannyasa. Can we have the light on the board, please? As I want to return to that list. So just to identify the 5 meanings for the word sannyasa found in this chapter. The first is trivial, sannyasa, renunciate. By the way, sannyasa here is in particular, karma sannyasa, renunciation of karma. Sannyasa means renunciation. So our topic then is karma sannyasa, renunciation of karma. And renunciation of karma could mean simple inactivity. Of course, that's not our discussion at all here. It can mean the lifestyle of a monk, someone who undergoes rituals and formally renounces the world and takes to the life of a sannyasi, a Hindu monk. But the meanings we're focused on in this chapter are neither 1 nor 2, but rather 3, 4, and 5. 3 and 4, you'll remember, are aspects of karma yoga. Karma yoga absolutely requires renunciation. Karma yoga requires sannyasa, not this kind of sannyasa. In number 3, karma yoga requires a kind of renunciation of trying to gain perfect peace and contentment through worldly activities. So you renounce the world in the sense that it's no longer your goal in life, finding contentment and peace through worldly activities. And the other kind of sannyasa involved in karma yoga is that is to renounce the results in the sense that you are the doer of action, but it is Ishvara that gives you the results. You do not produce the results, you only produce the action. It's Ishvara from whom the results come. So to renounce the results is another kind of sannyasa. But our current topic is number 5, which is Naiva kinchit karomiti, I don't do anything at all. That's the 5th kind of sannyasa, and which is really the main focus of this chapter 5 on sannyasa. And that's the renunciation that is natural to your true self. Your true self as pure consciousness, Satchidananda Atma. That pure self is never engaged in action, has never been engaged in action, will never be engaged in any kind of action. So by nature, your true self, Atma, is a sannyasi, a renunciate in the sense that renouncing all action, never involved in any kind of activity. Okay. With that in mind, concluding this particular topic in verse 10, we saw verse 10 at the end of the prior class, where Sri Krishna said, Brahmani adhaya karmani, adhaya, placing, karmani, placing in the sense of attributing, karmani, attributing all actions, brahmani, to Brahman, to reality, meaning rejecting the false notion that your true self, Atma, is a doer of action, but actions take place. Actions take place as part of the world being a manifestation of Brahman. So attributing all actions to Brahman means attributing all actions to the world and not to consciousness. Sangam tyaktva, giving up attachment, which is part of the karma yoga that we saw before, giving up attachment. Yaha karoti, one who is involved in action, na lipyate sapape. I'm just changing the word order a little bit. That person is not tainted by sin. Padma patram iva ambasa, that famous metaphor, just as water does not make a lotus leaf wet. The lotus leaf has a waxy surface, and when water comes in contact with it, it beads up and doesn't make the surface of the leaf wet. That's a metaphor for just as water doesn't make a lotus leaf wet. In the same way, actions do not affect Atma. Water doesn't affect the lotus leaf. Actions don't affect Atma. Can you answer why? We have to be very careful. We can say things and it sounds a little dogmatic. Actions don't affect Atma, and you can write it down. Actions don't affect Atma, and you take it as a statement of fact. We have to understand why. Otherwise, it's just a lot of useless information if we don't understand why. Why is it that actions don't affect consciousness? Consciousness being your true nature. Actions affect whoever does the action. Make sense? So if I drive a car too fast, and when I say actions, I should say, let me be a little bit more precise in my language here. When you commit an action, there's a result. The result is punya or papa. It's merit or demerit in a religious sense. To whom does that religious merit and demerit, papa, punya and papa, the results of an action, to whom do those results accrue? The answer, of course, is to whoever did the action. And that makes perfect sense. A silly example I made up is this. If I drive a car too fast and get a speeding ticket, you shouldn't have to pay for that ticket, right? The consequences of an action accrue to the one who committed the action. Well, now you can answer the question. Why is it that actions don't affect consciousness? Consciousness is not the one who commits an action. Actions are committed, but not by consciousness. By the body-mind sense complex, and we're going to talk more about that today. The body, mind, and senses are engaged in action. The individual person, we use the word jiva to talk about that individual person. The individual person who is engaged in action accrues the results of those actions, not consciousness. Why? Consciousness illumines the activities of your mind without doing anything. The basic metaphor right now is light is illumining my body. You see my body acting. Does the light do anything? Actions take place in the presence of the light, but the light only reveals those actions. The light doesn't participate in those actions. That's the idea. Consciousness reveals the activities of your mind. Consciousness doesn't participate in those activities. So that's why consciousness is not affected by action. Just like water doesn't affect the lotus leaf, actions don't affect Atma. Now, our next couple of verses, Sri Krishna actually switches a bit to karma yoga, and he switches to karma yoga because there's a similarity here between, where is that? Between number 5 and numbers 3 and 4, and that is, in both cases, you are not affected by your actions. A sincere karma yogi is not affected by actions any more than a lotus leaf is affected by water. So this metaphor of not being affected is true both for the enlightened person and for a mature, sincere karma yogi, and that's what we're going to discuss now in the next verse. Kayena manasa buddhya, kayena manasa buddhya, kevalarindriyarapi, kevalarindriyarapi, yoginah karma kurvanti, yoginah karma kurvanti, sangam tyaktvatma shuddhaye, sangam tyaktvatma shuddhaye. Start in the third line. Sri Krishna says, yoginaha, for yogis. Prior line, he was talking about Yaha karoti, the one who acts, having attributed all actions to Brahman, talking about the enlightened person. Prior several verses were talking about enlightenment, and enlightenment is a quality, enlightenment is true for the fifth kind of sannyasa here. But now we're backing up to karma yoga, and the word yoginaha should be a clue, right? Yogi is a word used for a spiritual aspirant, not for a wise one, not for someone who's enlightened. For the one who's enlightened, they don't need to do any kind of yoga anymore. Their performance of yoga is no longer necessary. They're enlightened. So yogi here is one who continues to be involved in spiritual practice, and not spiritual practice in general, karma yoga in particular. So here, yoginaha means for one who practices karma yogi. So yoginaha for, actually it's plural, yoginaha. Those karma yogis who, karma kurvanti, who are engaged in actions, who are doing actions, sangam tyaktva, and there's our sannyasa again. Tyaktva, giving up. That's sannyasa. Giving up what? Sangam, attachment. And that was one of the main principles of karma yoga, right? You act with an attitude of sacrifice, or you act recognizing that the results are in Ishvara's hands. We gave several attitudes through which you become free from attachment. Attachment, remember our definition of attachment. Emotional dependence. If you get what you want, you're happy. If you don't get what you want, you're unhappy. If you get what you don't want, you're unhappy. This is attachment. And that's raga and dvesha, right? Raga is a compulsion to get what you want. Dvesha is a compulsion to avoid what you don't want. So sangam tyaktva, giving up attachment, atma shuddhaye, for the sake of shuddhi, purification, of atma. Does that sound funny to you? For the sake of purification of atma. We've had this discussion before. Atma doesn't always mean your true self, consciousness. Atma means other things in other contexts. Here it means mind. Atma Shuddhi means chitta shuddhi, purity of your mind. So these karma yogis are doing actions without attachment, atma shuddhaye, for the sake of purifying their minds. And purification, we've had this discussion before, purification means removing something. And in particular, removing raga and dvesha. So atma shuddhaye, they're acting for the sake of purification, for the sake of overcoming raga and dvesha. And here, just to make the connection to the prior verse, I said that in a prior verse where it said that they're not affected by actions, just like the lotus leaf is not affected by water. I said that's also true of karma yogis. Why? Again, we can't just accept things. We need to understand the mechanism. Otherwise it's a doctrine at best and a belief at worst. And beliefs and doctrines are not the same as assimilated knowledge, learning, wisdom, which is our goal here. So, how is it that a karma yogi is not affected by their actions? We had a discussion long ago where we said that the results of an action depend on your intention. Do you remember that discussion? Is this working? My ear is not working. It just blocked up. Okay, no problem. The results of an action, the karmic results of an action, punya and papa, religious merit and demerit, depend on your intention. Remember, I gave a really silly example of someone who takes a sharp knife and cuts a person open from chest to belly, to navel, cuts a person open. In some contexts, that would be a mahapapa, a great sin, unless it was being done by a skillful cardiothoracic surgeon, someone who's doing heart surgery. So the intention of a mugger who uses a knife to cut someone, and the intention of a surgeon who uses a knife to cut someone, notice that the actions can be the same, but the intentions are completely different. Therefore, the karmic results are completely different. For the mugger, it's sin. For the surgeon, it's actually punya. The surgeon is doing punya karma, a good deed. Intention counts. The other example, just to make this is an important point, make sure it's clear. Remember, I gave the example of if you step on an insect accidentally, you kill the insect, but if the insect is killed accidentally, there's no papa. On the other hand, if there's a spider crawling along and you smash that thing, you could take it outside, right? Easily. But if you choose to smash that thing, you incur a tiny amount of papa karma, intention. So here's the idea. What is the intention with which a karma yogi is engaged in action? In the prior 2 chapters, we've discussed 3-4 different attitudes. And most applicable here, the attitude of sacrifice. The attitude of sacrifice comes when the karma yogi first recognizes that my human efforts will never lead to perfect peace and contentment. Therefore, let me turn my attention away from the worldly results of my actions. Let me instead dedicate myself to following dharma, and in that way, offering my deeds to God. By following dharma, I offer my deeds to Ishvara in a sense that dharma is what Ishvara once, in figuratively speaking, once. Ishvara is not a human being with human wants. But we had this discussion before. We said Ishvara's intelligence is manifest in the world as the order of the world, as dharma. When you follow dharma, you are acting in conformance with Ishvara's will. I'll say that again. When you follow dharma, you're acting in conformance with Ishvara's will. You're obeying Ishvara, so to speak. You're being a good boy or a good girl, as people say. But that means you turn your back on other things and you dedicate your actions to Ishvara by following dharma. That's sacrifice. We had a long discussion about that in the prior chapter, chapter 4. So the point I'm leading up to here is intention. Conventional activities are done with the intent of getting the result. Obviously, most people go to work for the sake of a paycheck. But the karma yogi, as we've discussed before, does not go to work for the sake of a paycheck. The karma yogi goes to work to follow dharma as a sacrifice of their deeds to Ishvara. They've dedicated their actions to Ishvara by choosing to follow dharma. That's a very different intent. One person goes to work for the sake of a paycheck. Another one goes to work to follow dharma, dedicating his or her actions to Ishvara. With that intent, you are not so I said, intent determines how the consequences of actions affect you. If there's no intent, and I'll be as precise as I can. If there's no intent to get a particular result, that action does not yield karma that will affect you. If your action is dedicated to Ishvara, it will not affect you. What is it? Oh, here's a metaphor that's often given. And I don't want this idea to be abstract. Here's a metaphor that's often given. When you put something in a fire, your intent matters. So if you're putting wood in a fire for the sake of staying warm, you get warm. Your intent matters. But if you're offering ghee into a sacrificial fire, your intent is completely different. When you put wood into the fire, the result is heat and ashes. When you pour ghee prayerfully into a sacrificial fire, the result is not merely heat and ashes, right? The result is blessings, punya, that come. Again, just to illustrate how the intention with which we commit an action is crucial. The mere performance of an action is almost beside the point. So we've discussed all that before, we won't go further. So the yogis who are engaged in action without attachment, they're doing so for the sake of self-purification, overcoming raga and dvesha. And how do they act? In the beginning of the verse, kayena, they act by means of their bodies. They manasa, they act with their minds. Buddhya, they act with their intellects. Indriyaihi api, and they act with their senses, sight, hearing, smell, touch, smell, etc. Also organs like walking, talking. We speak of jnanendriyas, sense organs, and karmendriyas, organs of action. So with all of these organs being engaged, they commit act. And there's a crucial word here, kevalaihi, merely. These karma yogis merely act with their bodies, minds, intellects, and senses. Why would Sri Krishna say merely? Well, what is our topic here? I mean, we're momentarily talking about karma yoga, but in the previous several verses, we're talking about the fact that consciousness, Atma, doesn't do anything at all. So that's why he says kevalaihi. These karma yogis are acting merely with their bodies, minds, and senses. Even these karma yogis are not acting with Atma, because Atma is not an agent of action. That's really the bottom line of this whole chapter. Atma, your true self, is not an agent of action. He's going to explain that more. Let's proceed. Yukta karma palam tyaktva, yukta karma palam tyaktva, shantamapnoti naishtakim, shantamapnoti naishtakim, ayukta kama karena, ayukta kama karena, phale sakto nibadhyate, phale sakto nibadhyate. Excuse me. Okay. Yuktaha is the subject of this sentence. And yukta is one who practices yoga. That's etymologically, they come from the same root. Yoga comes from yuj, yukta comes from the same root. So yukta here means a karma yogi who is mature, who is sincere, who has been purified through their practice of karma yoga. And that mature karma yogi, tyaktva, having given up karma palam, the results of action. How many times have we discussed that? So the karma yogi turns his or her back on mere worldly accomplishments to seek something more. And that's that kind of renunciation involved for the karma yogi, the yukta. Oh, here, I made a note here. The commentator Madhusudhana Saraswati gives a very nice definition here of this yuktaha, this mature person. He says, and I wrote it down so I can quote it to you. Ishvaraya eva etani karmani na mama palaya. Etani karmani is giving the attitude of the sincere karma yogi. The sincere karma yogi thinks etani karmani, these actions, Ishwaraya eva, are for Ishwara alone, dedicated to Ishwara alone. Na mama palaya, they are not for my benefit. This is the attitude of the sincere karma yogi. So that sincere karma yogi, I keep saying sincere because maybe I don't need to say it. You can imagine, there are karma yogis who in name only, they're karma yogis, right? There are people who are engaged in charitable work for the sake of satisfying their egos or looking good to others. There are those who don't understand karma yoga at all. I mentioned before, those who assiduously fulfill all their duties and claim they're a good karma yogi, when the fact is, as they're fulfilling all their duties, they're constantly complaining about all the work they have to do. That's not karma yoga. Karma yoga is not merely doing your duties. Anyway, there are so many less than mature. He uses the word yukta here. There are many mature karma yogis. There are many who are not so mature. But those mature ones, those sincere ones, apnoti, in the middle of the second line, they gain naishtikim shantim. Shanti, you know. Naishtikim, eternal, unchanging. They gain perfect peace. A sincere karma yogi gains perfect peace. Why? Prior verse we saw that their minds become purified. Being purified of raga, dvesha, they are ready for these teachings to penetrate. We've had this discussion before. Understanding what Vedanta teaches is easy. It's not rocket science. It's also not terribly simple, but it's not that complex. You can all understand completely and clearly what Vedanta teaches, but it may or may not go in. It may or may not bring about a transformation in the way you see yourself and the way you see the world, that inner transformation that we call enlightenment. And the distinction, it comes about because those who are not prepared, for those who are not prepared, the teachings don't sink in. For those who are prepared, the teachings do sink in, and they undergo that inner transformation. So here he's talking about the yuktaha, the mature karma yogis, become purified through their practice of karma yoga, and through these powerful teachings of Vedanta, that inner transformation takes place. They become enlightened, and apnoti, they gain naishtikim shantim, perfect, eternal peace. On the other hand, ayuktaha, pretty clear the contrast. First half begins with yukta, the mature karma yogi. Ayuktaha, the karma yogi who's, as I said, not so mature. That person who is kama karena, one who is still driven by desire, driven by raga dvesha. The one who has not overcome raga dvesha, pale saktaha, being attached to the fruits of the results, this karma yogi doesn't get it. They continue to feel that perfect peace and contentment are possible somehow through purely worldly activities if they just keep trying hard enough and long enough. But trying hard enough and long enough, they just keep going and going and going. You've seen pictures of the rat race? I have to, if you can find it on YouTube, there is a 5-minute animation of this rat race. It is brilliant. I don't remember the name for it, but you can try. Go to YouTube and search on rat race. If you can find, it's like a 5 or 10-minute video. It's an animation. It shows these rats engaged in worldly activities and suffering and struggling. The reason we call it rat race in English is very clear, right? These rats are engaged in a race for food, or they're on this wheel in a cage. And what the point is, what do they accomplish? Picture that rat on that wheel, or a hamster on that wheel. They're running and running and running. Do they ever accomplish their ultimate goal? And the so-called rats in the rat race represent all the people going off to work every Monday morning. If they're going to work for the sake of perfect peace and contentment, when will they get it? You get it. I mean, you get what I'm saying. And that is, the rats haven't figured out that they're engaged in a futile effort. They're seeking perfect peace and contentment by means that will never result in perfect peace and contentment. As long as those rats are engaged in the race, last word, nibadhyate, they continue to be bound. Bound by their desires. Desires bind you to pursuing worldly goals, even though those worldly goals will not culminate in what you really want, which is perfect peace and contentment. This is bondage. Sri Krishna says, Pale Saktaha, those who are attached to worldly results, nibadhyate, they continue to be bound. Okay. Now, Sarva karmani manasa, sarva karmani manasa, sanyasyaste sukham vashi, sanyasyaste sukham vashi, navadvare pure dehi, navadvare pure dehi, naiva kurvanna karayan, naiva kurvanna karayan. Beginning of the second line, sanyasya, having renounced. Having renounced what? Now, by the way, just to set the context, we're back to number 5. We're back to the renunciation of the enlightened person. Sanyasya, having renounced. Having renounced what? First line, sarva karmani, all actions. Having renounced all actions, manasa, with the mind. There it is. Having renounced all actions with the mind means what? By recognizing that your true nature is pure consciousness, which is not involved in actions. It illumines the actions of your mind, but that consciousness is not engaged in any kind of action at all. This is a manasika renunciation, a mental renunciation, right? It's a renunciation through knowledge, manasa, with your mind, with your understanding. You renounce all actions through the recognition that my true nature is pure consciousness. As pure consciousness, naiva kinchit karomi iti, that prior verse, I don't do anything at all. Such a person who is vashi, self-controlled because they're not dragged about by raga and dvesha anymore, right? This is the idea of self-control. Well, you've heard, I've made this joke before. No one likes to be bossed around. We all like to be in control of ourselves. But inside of you are two bosses bossing you around, raga and dvesha. They boss you around continually. So here, vashi, the one who's self-controlled, is one who has kicked those bosses out, raga and dvesha, no longer controlled by raga, dvesha. That person, sukham aste, aste remains, sukham, happily. That person who is, that person in the third line, that person who is the dehi. Deha is physical body. Dehi is that one who resides in the physical body, referring to consciousness, referring to your true self, Atma. So that true self, aste, sukham aste, remains happily. Dehi, the embodied one, remains where, nice expression, this comes from Upanishads. Sri Krishna here is quoting from Upanishad, where he says that the true self abides, navadvare pure. The true self abides in a pura. You might know pura as city, as in Hastina pura. So Pura is city. And here, the city that he resides in is not Hastinapura, nor Somerset, New Jersey, but abides where? In what city? Navadwara Pura. In a city having Nava, 9, Dwara, gates. The city of 9 gates is a poetic way of describing the body. What are the 9 gates? Means a gateway to a city. You know, the old walled cities you could only enter the city through one of its gates. Here, things can enter your body only through one of 9, enter or leave. So you can enter or leave through a gate in a gated city. Here, the world can enter or leave through 9 gates in your body. What are those 9? You got 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth, that's 2, 4, 6, 7, and 2 more below the waist. So these are the 9 gateways through which things can enter or leave through these 9 gateways. So in this Navadware Pura city, in the city of 9 gates, consciousness dwells. What's significant about that? It's almost too obvious. You are that consciousness dwelling inside your body, looking out through these gateways, hearing whatever comes into these gateways, smelling whatever comes in these gateways, tasting whatever comes in this gateway. You are the consciousness dwelling within the body. Fact is, most people don't think like that at all. Because they say, I am hungry. When somebody says, I am hungry, is it the consciousness within that's hungry? Consciousness gets hungry? Hunger is a sensation felt in your body, correct? When someone says, I am hungry, they're identifying themselves not as the indwelling consciousness, they're identifying themselves as the body. If you say, I am male or female, you're identifying with the body. If you say, I am tired or I am alert, you're identifying with the body. Conventionally, people are 100% identified with the body, which oddly enough is completely contrary to your experience. Is it not true that you experience yourself looking out through these holes? You experience yourself as the indweller. Do you experience yourself as a conscious being embodied in this Navadwara Puri, in this city of 9 gates? This is what we experience. We experience ourselves as embodied consciousness, but then we make a mistake. We don't identify ourselves as being, we don't properly identify ourselves as being embodied consciousness. We identify ourselves with our bodies, with our minds, with everything else. And this is where we get in trouble. This is where ignorance begins to pull us down. We'll see that point in just a moment later. So, the enlightened person, renouncing all actions, manasa, with the mind, recognizing that he or she, true nature, is pure consciousness, which is not engaged in any actions whatsoever. That person, sukham aste, remains happily in this body of 9 gates, that dehi, that embodied consciousness, and in this body, naiva kurvan, not engaged in action, na karayan, nor causing action. Not engaged in any actions, not causing any actions, consciousness. Consciousness doesn't talk. Nor does consciousness cause my body to talk. Talking is governed by the mind and brain, right? Now the mind is illumined by consciousness, but that consciousness, like the light, is not involved in activity. Light reveals activity without being involved in activity. Consciousness reveals mental activity without being involved in that activity. Therefore, consciousness, that true self, naiva kurvan, abides in the city of nine gates without acting, na karayan, nor causing the body to act. Okay. We'll see the next verse. Good. Na kartritvam na karmani, na kartritvam na karmani, lokasya srijati prabhuhu, lokasya srijati prabhuhu, na karma phala samyogam, na karma phala samyogam, swabhavastu pravartate, swabhavastu pravartate. Wow. Sri Krishna now is getting into something very deep or heavy, as we say here. It's an inquiry into this fundamental issue. We say that your true self, consciousness, is not an agent of action. But that sense of agency is a fact of life, right? People say, I did it. Or the child, when parents come home and find something broken, the child says, I didn't do it. The point is, in both cases, there's agency. This sense of agency, being an agent of action, is something so pervasive in human experience. When you say, I did it, that is an expression of agency. Where does that sense of agency come from? So, and just be very clear. You can say, I came to class. I did it. I came to class. But if I reflect on what I know to be true, I can honestly tell you, I am not teaching. I didn't do it. In what sense? How can that be so? How in conventional life can we say, I did it? And how from another perspective can we not be an agent of action? Sri Krishna explains it here, and it's rather a heavy topic. In the second line, actually you have to pick up the na from the first line. Prabhu usually means master. But here, the context is master of the city of nine gates. Get the context. Master of the city of nine gates. That master is consciousness, right? Your true self, Atma. So the word Prabhu here refers specifically to Satchidananda Atma, your true self. And Sri Krishna says, Prabhu, the master of the city of nine gates, pure consciousness, na srijati, does not create lokasya for a person. The consciousness does not create kartritvam, agency, na karmani, nor actions. Consciousness doesn't make you say, I did it. Consciousness doesn't make you do anything. Consciousness doesn't make you feel like an agent of action. Right now, you probably feel like an agent of action. Do you feel like you're listening to my words? Probably, if you're still awake. So, if you feel like you are engaged in the act of listening, Sri Krishna says that feeling of being an agent is not born of consciousness. It's a fact. You feel what you feel. You feel like you are engaged in the act of listening. Fine, you feel that, absolutely. But it's not caused by consciousness, is what Sri Krishna says. And in the third line, not only is that feeling of being an agent not caused by consciousness, karmani, actions, the act of coming here to the ashram is not caused by consciousness. And in the third line, na karma pala samyogam. Samyogam, connection, but here receiving karma pala, causing you to receive the fruits of your actions. Conventionally, we are recipients of karma pala, the fruits of our actions, but that is not caused by consciousness. So in the first three lines, Sri Krishna says, consciousness is not the root cause for feeling like an agent of action. Consciousness is not the root cause for being engaged in action. Consciousness is not the root cause for being a recipient of your karma pala, the fruits of your past actions. So if consciousness is not the root cause, what is? And here we go. He says it so briefly, but it's going to take a while to explain. Swabhavaha tu pravartate. Swabhava you may know as nature, that which is natural. Swabhava tu, but swabhava pravartate, nature takes place. Nature is unfolding. Consciousness doesn't create your sense of being an agent of hearing, engaged in the act of hearing. It's natural to feel like you are an agent of action. It's natural to feel that you are listening to what I'm saying. He says it's natural, not caused by consciousness. He says natural. And here, those two words, we'll see more in the next verse. But we need to explain those few words in the last line. In what sense does nature cause you to feel like an agent of action? How does nature make you engaged in action? Well, it's actually simpler than you think. When you are born, are you born enlightened? When you were born enlightened, or were you born in a state of ignorance? Well, it's natural to be born in a state of ignorance. In that state of ignorance, did you know your true nature to be full and complete? Did you know that your contentment and peace did not depend on anything external? Yeah, you didn't know any of that. Did you know that your consciousness is not engaged in any kind of action? You don't know any of that. So we start off naturally, at birth, we start off with ignorance. We all start off with ignorance. Because of that ignorance, when we find ourselves, because of that ignorance, we identify with our bodies and minds. Isn't that natural? Because of ignorance, we identify with our bodies and minds. When our bodies and minds want something, when we're hungry, or when we are mentally desire something, then what do? Naturally, we engage in karma, action. We become an agent of action, and we engage ourselves in action. That's natural. So look at, in fact, I skipped a step. We'll see this in more detail in the next class, but it's important to see the meaning here and now. Born with ignorance, failing to recognize your innate divine nature, failing to recognize your innate fullness and completeness, mistakenly concluding that you need stuff to be happy, stuff outside in the world. So you start with ignorance, next comes desire. First comes ignorance, avidya, next comes desire, kama. There are so many things in life that I need, I want for my contentment and well-being. And kama, in the form of raga and dvesha, drives you to do karma. Avidya comes first, naturally. You're born ignorant. Ignorance leads to kama, desire. Desire leads to karma, action. Avidya, kama, karma. Ignorance, avidya, leading to kama, desire, leading to karma, action. It's natural. I'm smiling because there's something a little bit perverse coming here. Someone might argue, well, if it's natural, then what do you say? Rakne do. Let it be. So why mess with it? If it's natural, the environment is natural, we should let it be. So this ignorance is natural, we should let it be. Avidya, kama, karma, ignorance leading to desire, leading to action, it's perfectly natural. Why should we not let it be? Well, an infant doesn't know how to use the bathroom. When that infant grows up to be 3, 4, 5 years of age, they better know how to use a bathroom. So the ignorance was natural and appropriate for the infant, but not knowing how to use a bathroom is not appropriate for a toddler. They have to learn. So look where we're leading with this. So this avidya, kama, karma is absolutely natural. It's fundamental to human behavior. But natural means not that we should merely accept it, but that we should outgrow it. That infant has to grow up. We have to grow up in a very literal sense. We have to outgrow our wrong thinking. We have to outgrow the conclusion that we can only gain contentment and peace through worldly activities. We have to outgrow the wrong conclusion that perfect peace and contentment are possible if you work at it hard enough and smart enough. We have to outgrow the ignorance that covers your true divine nature. We have to outgrow the raga and dvesha, which are like two bosses inside of you, bossing you around all the time. So all of this is natural. Ignorance is natural. But we have to outgrow. Have to means life is I'll end with this observation. Somebody asks, what is the purpose of life? And so often this question is asked. What is the purpose of life? And the simple answer is the purpose of life is to live. Fine, but what does it mean to live? And I would suggest that the best answer to that question is this. To live is to grow. What does it mean for a plant or tree to live? For a plant or tree to live means it should grow. What does it mean for an infant to live? Very rapidly, that infant grows. But now we're grown adults. Does growth come to an end at some point? Go back to the plant. When a plant stops growing, it dies, right? When a plant stops growing, it dies. Apply that to the human condition. If you stop growing, you start dying. That's not life. Life is growth. And in our current context, to live fully is to outgrow this ignorance that causes all suffering and problems. There's more to be said on this topic. We'll see in the next class. A quick announcement. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our usual satsang, question-answer session at 6 p.m. Come and join us. I'll remind you that daylight savings time starts tomorrow, so be sure to check the time before you come. And we'll conclude with our prayers. This one. Om Gananahan Tva Ganapatigam Avamahe Kaving Gavinam Upamashravastumam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspataha Nashranvan Uttibasira Sadhanam Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gurudhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramhanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya Om Shanti 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 Om Tat Sat.